Welcome back, Richard Dorsey here at the beautiful Featherleaf Inn. See, I remember this time. Beautiful property. Shout out to Ryan Flegel and everybody who has supported us. I'm here with the illustrious Chalana Brown once again.
Oh, good day, everybody.
Fight him in the comments, Daren the Bear Georges. And we're joined by another gubernatorial candidate, Ms. Donna Frett-Gregory. Welcome to Dialogue 340.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get into it, I want to go a little bit into your background, your professional history, some of the values that you grew up with. And for that, the bear himself after some of these questions.
Who is the unsung hero in your story life? Who instilled the values in you? Who motivated you? Who put the early foundations to build to where you are right now?
My parents, because, and particularly my dad. My dad required us to work really hard. So as children growing up, my siblings and I, we had our own shop where we sell what we call in St. Thomas special candies. So the kids would come in the summertime and purchase, the special the candies. But what we did with that money was purchase our uniforms. So our dad required us to work pretty hard and learn responsibility from a very early age. And after school, my dad was a mechanic, and we would have to go to his garage. And before we go home in the afternoon, we had to help sweep up and make sure things were in order for the next day. So because of that, I recognize the importance of hard work and being true to the work and true to the game.
That's really
Yes.
good. So my next question to you, what motivates us? What further education did you have, or what motivated you to go in that direction?
Could you say that again?
No, I was saying what motivated to, because you further your education, what motivated to go in that direction, and what led you to the place that you're in right now?
Okay, so of course, I graduated from high school here in the Virgin Islands. I attended Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. I have an MBA and an MPA. So, and I also did a certificate of state leadership from Harvard University. But I'm motivated because I'm a Virgin Islander. And when I look around the territory, I recognize that, you really need people that care. And I'm one that care about the future of this place. I care about the young people. I want to see progress for our place. I know it's very doable and we can get it done. We just have to dig our heels in and have the will to move things forward here in the territory.
And speaking about your love of young people, you spent some time in the Department of Education. Was there anything that led up to you being in the Department of Education?
Well, actually, when I came home from college, I worked at the legislature for about 2 to 3 years. And then I got a call from the former governor, Alexander Farrelly. And because Alexander Farrelly believed in young people and believed in paying it forward. And he asked me to serve as a district director of administrative services, which is fiscal services for the Department of Education. I did that for about 3 to 4 years. I left, went to the Department of Justice. Then I was asked to come back to the Department of Education because they were experiencing challenges with spending their federal funds. And the department was and it still is, a compliance agreement with the federal government as it relates to its federal dollars. So when I got there, I dig my heels in really deep. I worked with the staff to ensure that we were no longer sending back federal funds. And if we were, on a very, very limited basis, based on residual purchase order balances. So I had the opportunity to actually serve as well as the assistant commissioner. So I went back to education as the deputy commissioner of finance. Then I got the opportunity to serve as the assistant commissioner of finance and operations. And then because of my inquisitive nature and one that, if I'm in an environment, I try my best to figure out all that's happening, how I can support the work, how I can be a part of the progress. And my then boss, Laverne Terry, she left to go back home. She was a commissioner to take care of her mom, and I was asked to serve as commissioner. And that was, a real lifetime achievement for me because I consider myself an anomaly because usually commissioners of education in the Virgin Islands are educators. I'm not an educator. My background is finance. But that was a really amazing time for me. Really rewarding is the better word because when you are able to support the work of young people, and then when you see them walk across the stage graduating and their parents and their families being very proud of that moment, and then the opportunities for them to come back to provide them with scholarships, etc., a really amazing and exceptional time for me in my career.
So one of the things about the Department of Education always fascinates me is the size of its budget. You've been a senator for so long, you know, you've been studying the budget. As one of the largest budgets in the territory, at times it's even bigger than some smaller countries' GDP. Being a fiscally minded person, what was your perspective of the Department of Education that might have been different from an administrator or a teacher, going from being asked to serve all the way into the commissionership? What was your perspective looking at the Department of Education?
I like that question. So it's all about managing your resources. So of course, as you said, the Department of Education holds the largest budget, the largest appropriation in government. So it really requires a lot of responsibility. Responsibility in managing the budgets in education is huge. But when you look at what's required as it relates to how do we obligate and how do we expend these dollars, and then when you look at our administrators and our teachers, we believe that it was very important to educate them as to how those dollars were expended and why, and what those limited resources could and could not do. Of course, we also had additional funding because we received funding from the federal government. And those fundings, the purpose of those funding was to go down to the school districts to support programs within our schools. And that's so critical and important as to how we focus on student achievement. So when, many of us in our community don't really understand how the dollars are allocated, but as leaders, we have a responsibility to educate our community as to how dollars are allocated and how we utilize those dollars within the best interest of the school system.
Well, as a woman, and we have to talk about how historically and monumental this time is, where we're seeing a lot of women in the race for our gubernatorial. I think it's a historical precedent. You talked about your father having responsibilities for you. Did he set intentions for you as a woman, because you had brothers as well, that you were going to be held up to the same standards of your brothers? And then how do you see that through today as a woman leader?
Absolutely. So my dad was a guy who you couldn't bring a problem without a solution. So absolutely, I had more sisters and brothers, but my dad was one that required us to, you just could not complain. Complaining was not an option. It was a complaint. We had to come to, please provide me with a solution. So with him having those types of expectations of my sisters and my brothers, it made me recognize that, I had no choice but to lead in my community. He made it a requirement for us to actually stand up and lead and be present and accounted for. Yes.
When we talk about ERP as well, because I'll go from lived experiences a little bit. I thought I had to be really knowledgeable in the subject matter that I was going to steward. And then I quickly realized that leadership is more, I would say an average 60% understanding ERP and immune system and procurement, and 40% of your actual genre that you're stewarding. How important do we reckon we have to have leaders be prepared, right? In our everyday walks of life, not just persons who hold executive team memberships, but how important it is for us to understand procurement processes. And what do you think is some of the holdup? Is it because we don't have the education of people to go in and they're learning while they're doing it? Or it's some kind of booting program we have to implement better?
I think it's training. So I'll tell you this. When I look at how our government functions today, and I shared this with one of my friends last evening, I believe that the staff that work with our financial management of our government should be career employees. Our challenge is really tied to the fact that we found ourselves in a situation where there's too much politics in how we manage from a financial perspective. And what I mean by that is those employees in who are financial leaders, financial professionals, if you will, those individuals should not be exempt employees. They should be employees who are trained, who are career employees that remain in the departments and agencies to truly support the work. What we find over the years is we continue to move these employees out of their positions because of the politics. So now we're relearning the work, and by the time by the time we get to understanding the work on the new people, you know what happens? It's at the end of an administration, and we've lost a number of years. So we have to get to what happens in the federal government, where our employees are in fact career employees. And what that means is you can be non-union classified. So for me, I have an excellent understanding. I've done a lot of work in our government, so I have a great understanding of the inner workings of government, and not to mention the financial management of government. And we do need leaders at this time, because of our challenges with our financials, who really understand and know the questions to ask of their leadership about the financials and where things are going in the respective department.
So, and our time always vanishes, the Hayes civilization. So I want to make sure we save enough time and flip over. So why did you run for office? Why did you want to be a senator? You were commissioner of education. I'm pretty sure you could have bounced around to other government agencies. Why go in the ring with 15, 14 other individuals?
Well, my background is finance, as you know, but I'll tell you, I actually was elected on the 13th Board of Education in, I think, somewhere around 1994. So that was not my first stint at running for office. But I decided in 2017 that I was looking around the Virgin Islands, and because of my knowledge, I realized that I would better serve as a senator. I would better serve as an oversight leader in the territory, someone who holds our leaders accountable, someone who understands the inner working. Because I'm someone who understands the inner workings of government, I knew that I had a lot to offer as a senator. And when I got into the Senate, I hit the ground running. I moved significant legislation to ensure that we were doing things that will help our community. And I know you're probably going to ask me, so why did you choose to run for governor? And it's a good segue, because I chose to run for governor, one, because I care. I care about our community, but I also recognize that I did a lot of hard work in the legislature, and senators don't do such a good job of sharing the work that they've done. So that's not a conversation. It happens. The conversation happens when you're on the floor, the legislation is passed, and then we move on to the next thing. But I recognize that in my 6 years, with all the significant legislation that I've worked on and that was passed, implementation remains a challenge in the Virgin Islands. And I tell people all the time that when you look at the territory, when you talk about all the challenges that we have, there's really nothing new under the sun in the Virgin Islands. When you go through our laws, these things are on the books. We have to have the will for the implementation to implement. And one of the things that I was very intentional about, along with my colleagues when I served in the Senate, was to not move legislation that was unfunded, no unfunded mandates. And that's one of the reasons why I ran for governor. Because if we're moving legislation that's not unfunded, then what is our challenge with implementing those legislation in earnest? We need leadership that understands that once we sign legislation, it's about the people. We have to remain focused on what matters to our people, and not what matters to us, but what we think. Because we're not always going to agree. But what we need to agree on is what we're doing and focusing on for the people of the Virgin Islands.
So your time in the legislature was interesting. When you sat, I believe you were chair of the Education Committee.
I was
Chair of Budget and Finance.
Budget Appropriation
Budget
Finance.
and Finance.
Yes. I actually changed the name. He used to be the chair of the Finance Committee.
Finance Committee.
Yes.
Sitting now as a chair of education, what was that perspective when now education's coming into the ring and you have to at times be a little challenging with them to get the information that you know is there because you were there before.
But what was good about it is I knew the questions to ask. So they knew that when they were coming before the education committee while I was there, that they came very prepared. So, I'll tell you though that I actually work behind the scenes with them because I really believe that it's not only about, I don't believe in the gotcha moments. I believe that we should work with our people. We should give our people grace. And I did work with them behind the scenes to ensure that, once they came before the legislature, they were prepared. I mean, as we look at the work, you have days when you're just not prepared. And that happened. But I believe that when I sat in that seat, I did more to help the Department of Education than, focus on their flaws, if you will. Focus on the challenges. And it's a huge department.
Yes.
And I'll tell you that when I look at education, we need to provide more support. More support to education. It's not only about the funding, it's about the resources and about the focus. I find that when we look at, when we do the work in education, we want our kids to be great. But we also want our educators to be in a place where they're comfortable providing that support in the classrooms, the work in the classrooms. And we've spent a lot of time, implementing a lot of different programs. We have to get back to focusing on literacy and numeracy in our classrooms. And that means that our community also has to support that work. And what I mean by that is, there was a time when I'm certain that, I think you guys are old enough, that
Betweeners.
yeah, you guys are old enough. Well, we have community centers in our housing communities
Yes.
that you were able to go to. That's what I did. I grew up in Hospital Wrong, they call it Wrong, they feel in St. Thomas, and we had Winston Remote Center, and we would go there after school to do our homework. We have to bring that back to our community. We have a lot of nonprofit organizations, and we have to set what we want to see our nonprofits doing for our children. That's very important. So those are the types of conversations that I've had behind the scenes with education. But coming before the Senate is not only about the oversight, it's also about helping with the work.
So, yes, Chalana.
Well, I'm glad that you said will, yeah, because I wanted to define that a little bit because I think you kind of wrapped it up when you said like resources, right? We need to provide people resources to do the work because I think a lot of people are like overworked, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. And then when you talk about after school programmings and stuff, like what is your framework that we could kind of like hold you to? We've been talking about PAL a lot. I went to PAL in Watagot and I got my homework done and I actually learned more of my cultural knowledges from after school programming. Like what is some of the things that you wish or you want to implement about after school programming? You want it,
I will.
but like what's the framework? How would that look?
So of course, resources.
Yeah.
So you need resources. So we receive millions of dollars in federal funds to the territory that's tied to education. And we're at a place where we need to really do an assessment of how we utilize those federal dollars. What is it that we want to focus on? What is the end game that we're looking at? So for me, I would have my leadership look at how we utilize those federal funds, and I'll just try to spread them across all programs. Because when you spread your funds across all programs, you know what happens, right? You're really just not good at anything.
Yeah.
So we need to be more focused and concentrated on what we want to see as the end game for our young people. So the implementation of after-school programs is also engaging with our nonprofit organizations. The legislature currently appropriates between $5 to $7 million in nonprofit dollars. We need to now begin to think about repurposing how we have the conversations with our nonprofit organizations and say, listen, this is our focus. This is what we want you to do. We want you to come into our housing communities. We want you to work directly with our students in these programs because this is our end game. So that's my thought.
So we have to have like an overall goal so everybody to buy into.
Absolutely.
Right.
And again, if you have an overall goal, you have to monitor your goal. So for me, I'm very big on, and you hear it throughout the campaign trail from me. What gets monitored gets done. So,
There we go. Yeah.
you know, saying you are the leader of Department X, I'm not going to just say that. I'm going to say you are the leader of Department X, and these are our goals. These are the things that we want to achieve within whatever that time period is. So you have to be able to do that as well as run your day-to-day operations in the organization. So we have to be working towards something. We just cannot continue to out fires and not be focused on what we intentionally want to do for our people.
I like that you said fires. For some reason, our budget always seems to be on fire. So, you have about 10 minutes left. Well, use this to open the door for our next conversation. In the second part, as the chair of our finance committee, talk to us. What's going on with our budget? Why we can't nail it down and stick to it?
So it's difficult, and I'll tell you why. Your budget has to align with your revenues. And also, we have a challenge where we have a lot of carryover projects from the previous year. And I just talked about that last night. So if you have, our budget is about 1.1, 1.3, give or take. I've been out of the Senate for 2 years. Billion, yes, sorry. Absolutely. Billion. You're absolutely correct. Right? So we see carryover deficits. And of course, that you don't see that in the legislature. We see that as we work in Department of Management and Budget and the Department of Finance. But you see those carryover expenses from one year to the next, and that gives you a deficit. And that deficit, I think I looked at the last audit that was conducted in, it came out this year in 2026, or 2025, but the audit was for 2023. So we have a carryover of about $500 million.
I'm sorry. Say that again.
Right? So our budget, right, yes, $500 million. So our budget is $1 billion, one should give or take, right? So right out the gate, when we start the year, we are already $1 billion down, $500 million down. So one of the things that we have to do, and that's why you need leadership that understands financial management. One of the things that we have to do is you have a 4-year contract. Let's just say for 20,000, just to make this conversation easy. That 5 years, 20,000. 4 years, 20,000. What we're requiring our departments and agencies to do now is to come up with that 20,000 in the first year, whereas you need only 5,000 each year, but we are putting that 20,000 in the first year. So now you carry over 15,000. So that's creating a deficit. Each year, what should happen is your contract that you're bringing before the legislature, you should only be bringing that 5,000. But what we're doing is we're bringing 15,000 over from the previous year. So it's contributing to a deficit. So we have to really look at addressing how we deal with our contracts. And you touch on procurement, how we deal with our contracts moving forward, so we don't see that level of a deficit. You have something called encumbrances in government, and that's how we set aside those funds. But remember now, it's setting aside funds on paper. So it creates that deficit situation. So as we pass the budget, now your revenues have to align. So each year, each quarter, whatever you set aside, whatever you set whatever you set up for that particular year as it relates to what you want to see each quarter as far as your revenues, if your revenues don't align with what you've appropriated, then you have to figure out how to do the dance. But what happens is, what's been happening in our government, we are waiting too long to make the adjustment in our appropriation. So the legislature should be saying, okay, come back mid-year, let's do a re-eval of the appropriations versus the revenues. But you know what? That's why it's so important for the legislature and the executive branch to work together, because when those calls are made, it should be an immediate yes. But you do get some pushback on it because, and you hear it all the time. The legislature controls the purse strings. The legislature is supposed to control the purse strings. But if you're not getting the information back to the legislature from the executive branch, then it makes it very difficult. And that's one of the reasons why I'm also running for governor, because it's so important for us to get our finances in order in the territory. If we are able to do that, and if we are able to address our economic opportunities and bring more revenues into our coffers, then we'll be in a much better place.
Chalana, you look like you wanted last thing before you end this segment. Don't worry, we're going to get the trickle down as soon as we twig. Daren's waiting, folks.
Yeah, but do you think that you think it's like somebody who is moving to a gubernatorial task and gubernatorial candidate? Is that something that we should always be thinking of at the forefront of our voting block about the kind of background, lived experiences? Is it better to be a senator going to be a governor, or just becoming a governor and have skipped the process of being a senator? It may have caused conflicts before, or maybe it might work out better if you've been a senator before.
I wouldn't say that you have to be a senator. What I will say is you have to understand the inner workings of government.
Okay.
You have to be able to relate. You have to be able to know the questions to ask in order for things to flow. So you have your leaders, and your leaders will provide you with reports, but you have to have a good understanding of how the government should work, the questions to ask of your leadership in order to move things forward. So no, I don't think you're required to be a senator, but most definitely you have to be a good manager, an excellent listener, and someone who definitely understands the inner workings of governance.
Well, everybody, I hope you've been listening. It's been Donna Frett-Gregory. This is the first half. We're going to get to part two, we get into economics. So it's going to be all Daren in the beginning. And we're going to ask her the questions around her executive decisions, some of the boundary days. Ms. Donna Frett-Gregory, thank you so much. We'll see you at part two, Dialogue 340.